started with today's webinar. Today's session is on resume and cover letter writing. This is part of a three-part series that I did, that I came up with through Creative University, and I'll be getting more into what exactly that is in a little bit. But really the whole point of this series is to help students and recent graduates who are specifically seeking opportunities in media, entertainment, and technology, and sharing what I've learned and from taking the perspective I've had being a student not too long ago, and also now working full time in the industry. And this is a three-part series. So as I mentioned, this is the second part, the resume and cover letter writing workshop. And next week, same time, Saturday at 11 Pacific, we are going to be having the last part, which is on interviewing. So one thing that I wanted to actually ask everyone was, how did you hear about this webinar? So I'm going to launch this poll. So if you can just put in whatever answer, and if you want to provide more details in the chat, definitely happy to hear that. This was definitely one of the most popular webinars I've done, and I think it just goes to show there's a lot of confusion around resume and cover letter writing, but I think along with that, there's also a lot of different ways that you can go about doing this, and there's no, just like there's no one right way to do it, there's also no wrong way to do it. And personally, I find that very, comforting, because whatever you want to do, as long as you're telling your story and as long as you're, being true to who you are and your experience, I think there's really no wrong way to go about doing this. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of the newsletter, LinkedIn. Okay, great. And let me see what the chat is saying. Okay, the Media Mavens Facebook group. Okay, great. Yeah, someone I actually connected with told me about that group just last week, so I thought I'd post in there. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I think a lot of it was through different Facebook groups, which one of the tips that I mentioned in last week's webinar was definitely make use of different Facebook groups. I think, it's been a great resource because everyone in that group generally wants to network and connect. So I think, it's definitely a great resource to use. All right, so I am going to end the poll. Okay, so let me get started first with, what is Creative University? What is this organization that I'm doing this series through? So Creative University was really started as a give back by Peter and Louisa Chadi and their children during the pandemic. And, we obviously know this is an extremely challenging time for everyone. And especially, for people targeting roles that are very networking based, it's all about who do you know and who have you met with in person. It can be very challenging to get access to those opportunities. And Creative University is really all about creating democratized access. And I'm a great example of, someone who took advantage of the opportunities and also really benefited from this. And part of what I've been doing is really focusing on ways that I can give back and help people as well. We've had some amazing webinars with top industry executives, and we have more coming up in the future. So definitely encourage people to sign up for the newsletters. I've been hosting these student sessions. I've also been talking to students and young professionals one-on-one. And really it's all about getting access to the right people that can open the door and open the door to the right opportunity and internship that'll get you that role that you want in this field that I think in particular is very elusive and hard to crack, so to say. And, one thing we mention in every single event, and I think is extremely important, is that relationships at the end of the day are what matter most. And, having access to executives and people like Peter and Louisa and being able to build those relationships and nurture them, I can't emphasize how great that can be for your career and for, building your professional network in general. So, what have we done so far? We've had 20 speakers, multiple student sessions, several workshops, landed lots of people at different internships, jobs. Peter just updated me this morning. A couple of more Creative University students were able to get roles just in the last couple of days, which is awesome. And, I actually got my full-time role through Creative University. So definitely can't emphasize enough the importance of the platform and the importance of engaging. And, I think it's great to come attend the events, but also, make yourself known, apply. And, here we have the URL where you can go to learn more about the program. And it's really about applying, showing that you're hungry for these opportunities and, just building that relationship, which is what I talked about previously. So, and one final thing on this, we actually have a couple of internship opportunities that just surfaced that I will be sharing more information about at the end of the webinar. And again, if you're interested and really hungry for these opportunities, apply and, start building those, that relationship and help us figure out who you are and what you're interested in and all of that. And, this slide is a great, summary of all of that. It's really, again, comes down to relationships and also definitely apply and, share with us what sort of opportunities you're looking for, because Peter and Louisa have a lot of, great relationships. And, the best part is they're willing to open that up for people like us. So definitely encourage people to take advantage. And along with that, so as I mentioned, the third part in the series will be next week at the same time. And there I'll be going deep dive into interviewing and, some of the best practices, like tips and tricks that I've learned, how to handle that over Zoom. And then this, I think, is super cool. We actually have Troy Carter coming and speaking with us end of January. And he doesn't do a lot of interviews. And for people who may not know him, he was Lady Gaga's ex-manager. He's a Spotify executive, and he just founded a new company called Q&A, which is based out of Venice. And they're all about creating technology platforms to help creators and musicians. So definitely someone who would be great to hear from and encourage people to sign up. And with that, I'm going to share the links for that so that people can access that. So just give me 1 second. All right, so, all right, a couple of links that I'm going to be sharing. So this is actually the webinar that I did last week. So if anyone's interested in the part 1, it's on YouTube now, so feel free to watch that and check it out. And same with this webinar, we'll also be turning that into a YouTube video. So, if you have to leave early or you want to share it with someone afterward, feel free to do that. And this is the link to next week's sign up. So this is again for the part 3 interviewing. And finally, this is the link to sign up for the Troy Carter Q&A. And again, I think definitely a great person to hear from and encourage people to sign up for that. Okay, so, and finally, some great resources for people. All of the past sessions that we've done on Creative University are now available on Spotify. And the podcast is called Fearless Media with Peter Chadi. So definitely encourage people to check that out. I think one thing that's really cool is that these executives are really speaking to students and young professionals because they know this whole program is built for that. And I've definitely learned a lot of, great just insights and, ability to stay positive and things like that. And finally, definitely encourage people to check out Peter's book. It's a quick read. It's around 100 pages, and he updated it recently talking about the effects of the pandemic on different parts of media. And, one secret weapon to help you stand out in any of this process is really understanding what's going on in the industry, having an opinion on the outlook of, what's going to happen to movies in a couple of years. How do you see music sort of growing? And this book does a great job of outlining what's going to happen to key industries in media and entertainment, and in particular, how the pandemic's going to change that. So definitely encourage people to check that out. And it's available for free. And, if you just go to the Creative Media website, you'll be able to download that. So just some background on myself. I'm a LA native. I was born and raised here. Went to UCLA for undergrad, and really just fell in love with live music and attending events and concerts and shows. And for me, there was nothing else that I wanted to work in. I knew this was what I loved doing, and I just had to figure out a way to kind of get my foot in the door when I was a student, and eventually get my first full-time role in the industry. So, this is one of my favorite quotes. This was actually, I heard it from our student body president at UCLA, and she said, "Don't let school get in the way of your education." And it's interesting because in last week's webinar, someone asked, how did I kind of balance school with, professional, recruiting, applying for jobs and internships? And for me, the focus was always my professional development, because I figured, school's great. Like, of course, get your degree. But I was always focused on, what do I want my life to be after this experience is over? And, especially in media and entertainment, it's all about who how can you get your foot in the door? So definitely encourage people to, kind of think beyond school sometimes, and, think about what kind of life do you want to build for yourself when you are, quote unquote, in the real world. And yeah, these are some tickets from some of the early shows I went to that really just got me into the scene. And this on the right is me at Swedish House Mafia's last show in LA in 2013. So some, timeline background. I graduated from Whitney in 2009 and UCLA in 2013. My first full-time job was at Insomniac Events. So they put on big dance music shows, festivals, concerts. And, I really just started as a fan, going to these shows. And it took me actually a year to just get an internship there. And it was a lot of just, emailing. And what actually helped was I called them one day and I asked, do you have any internships? This is my background. And they were kind of surprised, this like college students calling to, intern here, but they actually did need someone to help with writing. So, I was like, oh, great. I was already working at a music magazine at that time. So, I sent them my samples, and, that was exactly what I needed to get that foot in the door. And, a lot of times, and I've seen this now, you may take an opportunity that you don't know where it's going to lead or what's going to happen. But, getting that internship at Insomniac turned out to really be the gateway into this whole world of music and entertainment. And when I graduated from UCLA in 2013, that was the year that Insomniac got bought by Live Nation. So I was there during the whole transition of, going from Insomniac as a rave promoter and, having them really be engulfed in Live Nation and that whole ecosystem. And my first full-time job was working as a music journalist. So I was part of the content team that took all of the shows and festivals that we did and captured that content and created that content online. And so I did that for a couple of years, again, was in LA, had access to these amazing events, festivals. And, around 2015, up until that point, I had always been in LA and I really wanted to try something new. And, I just took a leap of faith and thought, I want to go big and I wanted to move abroad. So I ended up moving to Qatar. I had some family there. So, my uncle was there and I'd been to the Middle East, and I was applying for jobs when I was in LA to Qatar, but no one was taking me seriously, thinking, why would this person from Los Angeles move here? It was just I just wasn't getting much traction. So I thought, let me move and then try to apply. And if things don't work out, I can always move back to LA. And, just through cold emailing, I was able to get my position at Tremo Theme Parks. And what was really interesting was, Qatar and the Middle East in general is focusing away from oil and gas towards more, entertainment based revenue, tourism, things like that. So I was part of the team that launched the country's first theme parks. And, in this role in marketing, I was able to touch all aspects of starting a marketing campaign all the way to the launch of the theme parks. And it was, after I was there around 3 years, I, decided I like being in media and entertainment, but I also want to expand my scope beyond, PR and marketing into more finance operations and learn more about the quantitative side of the business. So that's what prompted me to apply for my MBA, and I applied from Qatar, got into Columbia, and then moved to New York from there. And, if you're a college student now, I totally get it. If you're trying to figure out next steps, how do you get a job in this pandemic? Because I was in that same boat, having graduated last year. And, I just kept telling myself, if I just keep trying and reaching out to people and reading the news and figuring out different opportunities, something will happen. And it turned out that the email that I sent to Peter was what got me my full-time role at Bulldog. So some backstory about that, I read Variety and Hollywood Reporter, all of those publications every day. And Peter had written this really great article in Variety, I think it was around April, about, the effects of the pandemic on media and entertainment, and the need to, to stay positive, and, the need people always have to connect with each other. And it was just such a great reminder to me to, stick to what I want to do and understand the world is changing, but there are opportunities out there. So I emailed him and I said, hey, I loved what you wrote. I shared this article with my classmates. And, I just told him some background, like as someone who was graduating this year, it was really, really nice to read this message of positivity and, just feel like there's some hope during this time. And, didn't expect a reply or anything like that. And he emailed me back saying, it turns out he was actually starting Creative University at this time. And it was exactly for people like me. It was for students and recent graduates who were looking for that next opportunity in media, entertainment, and tech, and looking for that access. And, I just started working with Peter, developing Creative University, helping out on marketing, building the newsletter, things like that. I never came into this thinking like, oh, I hope this leads to something bigger, but I just thought this is a great person I want to work with. And I really, liked the mission, and, the speakers he was bringing in was amazing. And, long story short, Peter connected me to my role at Bulldog right now. And, I oversee all of our strategy, and Bulldog focuses on premium white labeled live streaming. We're the most experienced company that does this. We were founded in 2012. And, being able to be back in music and events on the digital side is something I am extremely grateful for, because I know, especially in this time, it's not easy to stay in that sort of field. And it was really just me reaching out to Peter, building that relationship, and then getting that opportunity through Creative University. So, this is something that I'm always going to remember. And I think it's just an example of, the different ways that you can find that right opportunity. Again, especially in this challenging time. So, I wanted to share that to kind of, also pass on that message of positivity, and, showcase to people that the opportunities are out there, as long as you just keep trying. So, here's a list of some of the places that I interned when I was at UCLA. This isn't to showcase like, oh my God, look all the places I worked at. For me, it was really just pursuing different opportunities. This includes UCLA and also my time at Columbia. So, for me, I just always was trying to get my foot in the door, trying out new things. A lot of times I didn't even know like, where would this position lead? But I always thought, if I can get the chance to try out a new company, why not do that? So now I'm going to start talking specifically about resume and cover letters. So now you have a sense of my background, different ways that I've gotten my roles. And, with resumes and cover letters, I think the main thing to remember is that networking and getting your material in the right person's hands is still the number one priority. So, you may be thinking, I'm getting conflicting advice of how to, lay out my materials. How should I format it? When should I send it in? And I think the main thing to always keep in mind is that it's not about what's in the material that's most important. It's making sure that it's getting read by the right people. So if you kind of go in with that mindset, I think you get a lot more ROI for your work that you do, because you're making sure that the work that you are putting in is actually getting read by someone. So this is just something that I always, keep telling myself also, especially back last year when I was applying to jobs. I would focus on, update the resume, cover letter, tailor it to each job, but then also make sure I was putting an extra effort on the side and, sending it in to possibly the hiring manager or, someone that I knew at the company that may be able to pass it along. I think the importance of that really cannot be understated. And okay, so I'm going to pause there. So, when I work on resumes and cover letters, it's often, even I do this, it's easy to kind of get bogged down in the details of, oh, is this sentence really effective? Is this what this person is looking for? And I always try to keep two things in mind. My first goal is always to make it as easy as possible for the person reading the material to read it. And by that, I mean giving them a sense of who you are, why you'd be a fit for the role, just laying everything out as clear as possible, I think is so, so important. And really, I put myself in the shoes of the person reading my materials. I think they're probably going through hundreds, if not thousands of applications. And what they're looking for is people that they can greenlight to then pass on to the first interview. Generally that's what they're looking for. So if you put the most relevant information at the top, that's a great way for them to say, okay, this person has what it takes to at least get, to be worth talking to in person. And that goes to the second point of making sure the most relevant information is at the top. And this may be, a little unconventional. I'm sure a lot of people have heard from college counselors and people, just always list things reverse chronological, help people see your journey. But for me, if my most relevant experience is at the bottom of my resume, or maybe it wasn't even a internship or a job, it might have been a side project I was doing, or it may even just be the fact that I'm in a band that's relevant to this company I'm applying to. I always try to put that information at the top of my materials, because I think, using that prime real estate to showcase your story is more important than, necessarily making sure everything's reverse chronological. And again, being in media and entertainment roles, you want to be creative. I think this is something that people value, as someone that does something out of the box. I'm personally not really a fan of like cookie cutter templates where, like Times New Roman font, stuff like that. It's just not, it doesn't feel like it's authentic to who I am. So, be creative. And a site that I recommend using is canva.com. They have a lot of really easy to use templates. It's free to use. And it really helps. It makes it seem like you use Photoshop or some really, fancy design tool to make your materials. And, at the end of the day, resume and cover letter writing is all a marketing exercise, I would argue. So, using some time to really brand and design your materials, I think is really, really important. So now I'm going to get into some examples of, materials that I submitted, and showcase different examples of how I've kind of laid out my resume over the years. And, take what works for you. I say that about everything is, everyone should do things in their own way, and it goes even for networking and interviewing. Do what feels comfortable for you, but also, try to step out of your comfort zone at times. But the main objective is always, again, like I mentioned, make it as easy for the reader to understand who you are, and optimize to put the most important information at the top. So this was one of my college resumes back when I was applying for internships. And so I'll just start from the top and kind of just give some comments on things to note, or, what I liked, didn't like about different examples. So I always like having a profile section at the top. Again, putting yourself in the mind of the reader. They have no idea who you are. So if you can just use the first couple of sentences to kind of give examples of, your personality, what drives you, what's your passion, any hobbies, things like that, I think is great. And again, it's about getting your personality across and guiding the reader to, kind of paint a picture of who you are. So I like putting I like putting profiles at the top. I also think the skills section is really great because firstly, it's an easy way for them to see right off the bat, okay, they have these skills that are necessary for this job. Because, sometimes what'll happen is recruiters at big companies will be trying to fill different roles, and the hiring manager will tell them, we need someone that has these 5 points. And if those 5 bullets are not listed in your resume, you probably aren't going to get fast tracked to the next round. So using this skills section is a very easy way to highlight all of that. And some things may be buried in the bottom of the resume, but this is a way to, again, get that at the top. And the whole point is to showcase to people that, I have the skills that you're looking for. And again, making the reader's job as easy as possible. So one thing that I did here that I think is a little unconventional, but I think is effective is so my most relevant or my most recent experience may not have been the most relevant for this role. So what I did was I created 2 different sections. And the first one, I made it event planning and marketing because I knew that that was going to be the most important experience for this role. And then at the bottom, I created a sort of catch-all, internships. You can make this your other section, other professional experience. And, this is a way to kind of help yourself highlight the most important information at the top, without having to go in reverse chronological all the time. And again, it makes the job of the reader easier because they can see right away, okay, these are the relevant experiences. And again, the whole point is for them to have enough reason to fast track you to the next round. So one other thing that I did here was I added lines for what I gained experience in. And this is another way to highlight those same skills that are transferable to the role that I'm applying to. And, I think this can be especially effective if you're a college student or may not have a ton of, full-time jobs. This is a way to showcase, what actual skills do you have that are relevant to the role. And you can even do this for things like side projects you've worked on, creative endeavors that you're in. You may say like you're a musician or you're an artist, and that may not go into the traditional, professional resume, but if you lay it out in a way explaining what did I get experience in, I learned how to work with artist managers, I learned how to use social media, I learned how to send emails and, build an audience. That's all relevant experience. And I think having a line such as this that says gained experience in is a way to kind of showcase that for roles that may not be traditional, jobs or internships. So here's another example of what I submitted to Disney. This was when I was a student at Columbia. So, this is my resume a couple of years later. Some things to note here. So if you see the way I started the Disney cover letter, I started with Investor Day webcast that I spoke with. And I think it's always good to kind of plug something that you've seen about the company, and especially something that shows that you've done your homework and your research. So, if you're applying to an artist management company and, you love an album that one of the artists just released, start with that as your hook in the cover letter. I think anything that shows your passion for that company and what they do is great. And, even better is if you can start with a story or something that's, more creative. And, again, for media and entertainment companies, Disney's a great example. People love stories. So anything you can use to kind of showcase that, I think is always great. So the right side is a more traditional sort of resume format. This was the one recommended by Columbia. One thing that I like about this that I would encourage people to do is that under companies, I think it's always a good idea to explain, what does this company do? What's the actual impact of the work? And this is for companies where people may not know the name. So, the theme park startup I worked in Qatar, one of the challenges was explaining to people, what is this company? Because, anyone here is not going to have an idea right off the bat. So, I could have said something like, Qatar opened 4 theme parks in Qatar, something like that. But what I did was that I made an emphasis on quantifying the size of the company and the work that we did. So I talked about how big, the theme parks were with the square footage, how much investment we had. A lot of times you can get these materials from press kits, or a lot of companies have these sort of like one pagers of like fast facts or materials that they share with journalists. So and it's all public information. So if you do work at a smaller company or have some experience that's not obvious right off the bat what it is, definitely encourage people to have a section just explaining that. And it's another way to market the work that you've done. So that's something else that I would recommend. Trying to think anything else with this example. Um, yeah, I think that's that for Disney. So this is an example of something I submitted to Spotify. I think, this felt a lot more authentic to who I am. I decided I wanted to kind of update my format. I changed the fonts. I kind of made it more, showcasing my personality and who I am. So starting with the resume, I put back the profile section. I think that's always a good thing to have so people understand who you are. Um, I think you can even say things like, what drives you? What are you passionate about? What are you trying to get experience in? It doesn't always have to be, this is what I've accomplished, although that's always good to include. But yeah, that's something that I try to put in is a profile section. So going down, if you look at my NBC experience, I didn't explain what NBC is because pretty much everyone knows. But one thing that I did do was, so my official title was Lifestyle Research and Analytics MBA Intern. So that was the official title, but really what I did was I worked on Bravo, Oxygen, and E programming. So I made sure to include those brands in the title because that's again something that may spark the interest of the person who's reading the resume. Maybe they're a Housewives fan and will think, oh, that's interesting that Anum worked at Bravo, for example. So always think of creative ways to kind of get the brand across, give more of a insight into who you are and the type of work that you've done. I'm trying to see what else. So one thing also that I think is just best practices is that you always want to focus on the impact of your work and not necessarily just describing what you did. And you may be saying like, I was just an intern in a marketing department. I never like managed huge campaigns. But if you take a second to kind of think about the work that you did and what the bigger impact was, I think that can be a great way of explaining it. So for example, you may have managed social media for an artist for their album release. And, oftentimes I'll see in resumes, people will list, uploaded social media content, created, social media calendar, wrote copy. And that's a very sort of descriptive way of explaining your experience. A way of focusing on the impact would be talking about what was the content for, what impact did the marketing have on the album. You could say, manage social media for XYZ artist, for their largest album release ever. And you can talk about the percentage increase in social media engagement. That's another way to kind of quantify the impact. And there's obviously a lot of different ways to do this, but one rule that I like to follow is that if it's something obvious from my title, I try to just not include that information or focus more again on the impact rather than just describing what I did. So, if your title was social media intern, listing things like uploaded social media content is not really an effective use of your space because people know that you did that. But if you talk more about the type of content, what kind of content did you strategize on, for example, what sort of copy did you come up with? So someone may have come up to you and said, we have this new event, would love for you to come up with some social media copy. So a way to kind of explain that is more using words like strategized on or develop content for this specific campaign. That's then again focusing on the impact rather than just descriptive, explanation of what you did. Here I moved my education to the bottom. I think, a lot of times people say, should it be at the top? Should it be at the bottom? I think it's always good to focus on the experience. But, I think if the person that is reading your resume went to the same school as you, definitely put that at the top and, use that as a way to kind of network with them. But Yeah, so here's another example from Spotify. I think with the cover letter, one thing that I like doing is bullet pointing my experience. And even taking a step back, I would say that this cover letter is probably a little too wordy in hindsight. Like now if I was rewriting this, I'd cut out a sentence or two. But what I like doing is I always have an experience section that has, my experience includes, and then highlighting exactly what I've done that's relevant to that role. And, I try to make it as easy again for the reader as possible. So talent management, that's something that was relevant for this role I applied to. So I literally wrote talent management and then talked about my experience in that specific field, data analysis, content creation. um, so, one way to have done this would have been to not lead with these labels and just start with my experience includes and then as DJ Manifesto's manager. But again, using that label, it kind of helps the reader see right off the bat, okay, this person has relevant experience. And, this is why they should, be fast tracked to the next round. Um, Another thing that I mentioned, so here in the top, you'll see I talked about some of the people that I've learned from at Spotify. So Sheila Spence came to one of my classes at Columbia and talked to us about Spotify strategy. So I mentioned that in the top. We had another speaker named Isa Nodermans. So I talked about her and what she talked to us about. And, these weren't people that I connected with one-on-one. And oftentimes, you may just hear people in webinars or different, speaking at different events, but just mentioning them by name, talking about, why what they talked about resonated with you is a great way to explain your specific interest in that company beyond just, oh, I'm a Spotify user, I love music, because that's something that everyone's going to be talking about. And one even more effective way of doing that is using direct quotes. So if you are attending a webinar with a speaker who's at a target company you're trying to work at, write down 2 or 3 key quotes and use those quotes as a way to, grab the attention of the reader in the cover letter. And again, just kind of showcase what differentiates you and why you're specifically interested in that company. Here is an example from Viacom CBS. So one challenge I had here was that my background was very music and events focused, and this was for a role at Pluto TV. So, you know, kind of had some overlap, but definitely, I knew one of my challenges was going to be explaining the, TV programming part. So what I did here was obviously, lead with my internship that I did in television. I kind of rewrote some of the content. So I focused more on, audience growth, marketing, marketing across different brands, because all of this was very relevant to that role. So oftentimes it's also helpful to kind of think about the work that you've done and how it translates over to the role that you're trying to target. And this is especially effective if you're trying to target a role that may not be directly, obvious from your background that you'd be a good fit for. And, again, there's a lot of creative ways to do this. I think sometimes we kind of shortchange ourselves and think, oh, well, I don't have any experience in this field. But then when you start to actually think about it, audience growth, marketing across different brands, this is relevant across so many different industries. So I could use that same technique of rewriting some of my experience to apply to lots of different types of fields. And at the end of the day, it is still relevant to those types of roles. And again, one thing that I did here was I made sure to include the key skills section, because I knew that, again, the challenge would be that my background wasn't strictly in TV, but when I thought about some of those transferable skills, that also helped me see, okay, no, I do have, what it takes to apply to this role. And this is what I've done that's directly applicable to this position. So from talking to some students from Creative University, a couple of people reached out to me because they're interested in graduate school. So I thought it could be helpful to also share my resume that I applied with when I was applying to business schools. And, I took a very unconventional approach. A lot of times people were saying, you should follow the official format of the school and, just go with that because it's easy for people to read. And I just saw the template. I was like, this just doesn't feel like it's authentic to who I am. And it's never been the way that I've showcased my story. So I came up with my own template in Canva. I wanted to, of course, you want to make the template something that is easy for people to read, but at the same time, I wanted it to stand out from all of the other thousands of people applying. So I came up with this template. I just really thought I liked the fonts. I liked the way that things are laid out. I thought it's easy and clear to read. Um, and I sent this to a consultant who I was working with. And, I said, how do you feel about this template? It's obviously very different than what's recommended. And she was like, yeah, it's going to stand out for sure. But, she didn't tell me it's a hard no. And for me, that was enough to be like, okay, I'm going to apply with this style of resume. So that's what I did. Again, made sure to highlight what the companies did. So up here, you'll see in bold where it says startup company building Qatar's first ever theme parks. I like having those sorts of descriptor lines when it's not so obvious, when it's not a company like Nike where everyone knows, okay, we know exactly what type of company this is. Have a profile section at the top, put my schooling at the bottom. That was also partly because I knew these people who are reading my resume are obviously going to see my educational background. So I didn't think it was I didn't want to use that, key real estate at the top to talk about my education. And this was a template that I designed in Canva. I, just started playing around with different fonts and boxes and came up with this. So, as I shared earlier in the webinar, definitely a great resource to look into. So this is an example of something creative that you can submit to people. And, I'm sure we've all seen those examples of like, oh, the way I got my foot in the door at this company was through creating this huge report. And, when people saw this, they were like, okay, yes, we want to hire this person. And, people have asked me like, well, this seems like a lot of work. Is this really relevant if I haven't, really, if no one's gotten back to me about a position I've applied to? And totally understand. I think this is an example of a different approach on that. And the whole point is to really kind of set yourself apart and showcase, in addition to your resume and cover letter, what else can you offer or what else can you send to people that'll help them remember you? So some backstory with this example, I'm a huge pageant fan. I've grown up watching Miss Universe, Miss America, and being in New York, being at Columbia, that was the headquarters for Endeavor. Or I don't think that it was the headquarters, but that was where Miss Universe was based, which is under the Endeavor parent brand. So, I literally just went online, started looking at people that were working for the Miss Universe brand, came across someone else who had done their MBA, and I thought, okay, great, let me reach out to this person and just say, hey, I'm interested in working for you all. Do you have any internship opportunities? And he was gracious enough to, reply back and set up a meeting. And when I talked to him, he said, and you'll get this a lot, especially in media and entertainment, because there aren't as formal recruiting cycles. But he said, well, one thing that we could use help with is an economic impact report. And being an MBA, you have the quantitative background to come up with this. And there was no job description, there was no formal posting. It was just something that he mentioned in our conversation. But I took that and I was like, okay, this is definitely a great opportunity. So I asked a bunch of questions, made a mental note. I'm big on writing things down. So whenever someone's telling me something, I, want to write down all the details. And then when I went back to my apartment, I just made this quick one pager of, my proposal for this project. And, I wrote, and the point of this was to showcase that I really understood what the project was and also, use it as a way to differentiate myself. And again, I made this in Canva, didn't take too long. Just took some time to kind of think about how I would go about coming up with this project, the tools I would use. I think this is another example of something that you can submit in addition to your resume and cover letter that'll help you stand out. And, especially if you're trying to get your foot in the door, oftentimes it's those kind of comments and passing people may mention that are actually signals of opportunities that you can use to then, start interning or working at a company. So especially if someone says, this is a challenge that we're having, or this is something we've been trying to figure out, but we haven't been able to, ask them some more questions about that and try to come up with your own project or your own sort of way of helping out with that. And, especially if you're able to, kind of market yourself as someone who's helping out, I think that pays dividends in the future. And it's a great way to really just get your foot in the door, start learning about different opportunities in the space. This is another list of words that I like to have handy. You can find a ton of these online, but I think when it comes to resume and cover letter writing, oftentimes people default to using the same words. My default is always, I like using the word managed, collaborative, and you want to try to switch up the verbs that you're using to start your bullet points with. So, any sort of list like this that you can have that you can reference, I think is great. And you'll be surprised after you go through and edit your resume, you'll see that, oh, this reads a lot differently just because I swapped out a couple of words here and there. Another great resource that I like using, especially when I'm writing, is Thesaurus.com. I think, so many times you'll use a word and it won't feel like it's the right word, or you want to use something stronger. Thesaurus.com has, great examples for everything. So just some other kind of helpful tips to use when you are applying. And some quick notes on, just general questions that I've gotten from people and thoughts on, I think a lot of times areas of confusion in this space. How should you list your jobs? Should you strictly go reverse chronological? What if you have some experience that's relevant, but not necessarily traditional job or internship? Always the second part of the two things that I always follow is put the most relevant information as high up as possible. So, I always try to optimize for that. And an easy way to do that, as I shared earlier, was, creating two different sections of, this is my, marketing experience if you're applying for a marketing job, and this is my other experience. And that's an easy way to highlight that. I also think having skills is really key. Everyone knows that now, oftentimes it's bots that are reading your resume in the beginning, not even a person. So, one thing I always do is go through the job description and highlight keywords in the way that that employer is writing those words. So, if they use something like brand strategy, make sure to use the word brand strategy somewhere in your resume and cover letter. And having a skills section, especially bucketed by types of skills, I think is a really effective way of doing that. Second point, what type of experience to include? I think especially in this time, if you have, volunteer experience, maybe you're part of a community group. It may even be like a Facebook group that you've helped manage, or, done some events for. Highlighting that type of experience is definitely, something that you can do. And one thing I would say is always try to make it as relevant to that company and that position as possible. But I think there's no hard and fast rules when it comes to resume and cover letter writing. So whatever you have that's relevant, it could be volunteer work, it could be a project, it could be a side gig. Feel free to put all of that on your application. And, I think especially in media and entertainment, people like seeing people who do creative things on the side or stuff that's unconventional. Optimize for keywords in the job description. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but go through and, like, I read each job description at least 3 times so I can start to pick up on the key language, and then use those same words, and even double check and do the control F and see how many times have I listed the keywords that are going to be important for this role. So definitely that's something that I always encourage people to do. When should you send your resume and cover letter? I think, again, there's no hard and fast rule. I've definitely, done the thing where I'll reach out to someone, send a cold email, and include my resume. Sometimes it's effective. Sometimes it can seem a little bit like overkill. I think what I generally would recommend to people is, if you're, cold reaching out to someone, if you're just trying to learn about their job, just get a contact in the company. I wouldn't send your resume right away because I feel like it does feel very transactional. But if they reply to you, if you have had a chat with them, definitely send, attach it in your email and send it over. But I think what's even more important than that is that in the body of your email, highlight your key 3 bullet points. And the fact is your attachment is probably not going to get read, especially in the beginning. So if you kind of condense that same information down and put it in the body of an email, that's actually oftentimes more relevant. And along with that, oftentimes I'll apply to a job, or uh, like I've applied to a job, and then I'll try to see on the side on LinkedIn, who works at this company that may be hiring, or someone that I could, kind of highlight my application to. And so that's something else that I do. But even more important than that is that ideally you want to have those relationships built before you actually apply. So that's where, some of what I talked in last week's webinar of, that's where the networking comes in. And that was the first thing that I mentioned in this webinar of, the most important thing is not what's in your resume and cover letter. It's who do you know at these companies? Who have you built these relationships with so that these people can vouch for you? So ideally, you obviously want to be looking for jobs and roles and opportunities, but at the same time, start reaching out to companies that you're interested in, even if there's no position, even if they say, we're not hiring right now. It never hurts to just be able to have a quick conversation, develop that relationship, and then, have just keep growing your network essentially. And, finally, always you want to focus on the impacts of your work over just describing the task that you did. And there's different creative ways to do this. One example is, tying it into the larger overall project that your task was for. At Insomniac, for example, I would always mention the size of EDC Vegas. It's the largest music festival in North America. And the work I did was, a small part of the whole ecosystem of what it took to put that show on. But, focusing on kind of the bigger picture and the impacts of your work, I think is really a great way to set your materials apart. And again, if something is very obvious from your title or your role, or it's, you know, or it's not super relevant to the position, I think you don't want to spend time emphasizing that, and instead focus on whatever is most relevant to the role. And, I think just finally, like I mentioned, being creative, being unconventional goes a long way, especially in these fields. Anything you can show that shows your passion for a company. And, I think this is especially relevant if you're a young professional. You may not have 20 internships to highlight, and that's totally not expected. But, talk about your personal connection to that brand, talk about the experiences that you've had going to Coachella, and find creative ways to showcase, the impact of what that festival's had on you. And especially a cover letter is a great way to do that. I think focusing on storytelling, especially in the cover letter, is a great way to really get your story across. And, finally, I really wanted to just highlight some new opportunities have come through Creative University. As I mentioned, this is what helped me get my full-time job in the middle of a pandemic. Could not be more grateful for that. And, I was talking to Peter, and he mentioned even more internships have come through from people that he knows in the industry. And, if you're really interested in this, I think I don't know why you wouldn't apply. Let us know who you are. So the first step is going to the website. So the URL is at the bottom. There's a quick application you can do. Tell us what you're interested in, what types of roles. So many opportunities are coming through, and we've been placing people at internships. We also have new opportunities to help grow Creative University. And that includes working on our website, helping out with business development and partnerships. And, we always encourage people to come up with their own ideas. This 3-part webinar, for example, was something that I came up with on my own, just from talking to a couple of people and, asking, what sort of resources would help you. And I heard from 2 or 3 students, resume and cover letters was an area that, some advice would be helpful for. So I said, okay, let me kind of break it down into these 3 parts. And that's how this idea for this webinar was created. So if you have your own ideas, I think, especially one thing that I don't have is I'm not a student right now. So I don't have that direct access to all of the clubs that, people are involved in, and really understanding what you guys can use the most right now. So if you have any ideas in general, also happy to hear from you. And again, it starts with applying, helping us know who you are. And, the opportunities are out there. And this especially is a field that if you don't pursue any opportunity that you're given, I think, um, it's really just a loss because you never know what's the right role or platform that's going to help you get that role. And, I'm a great example of that. When I started working with Peter and Louisa on Creative University, I never thought that, oh, this would be the thing that helps me get that full-time job, but it was. And it really, again, is all about just building relationships, helping yourself get known, all of that sort of thing. And, one thing that I always like to mention is, and this was something that I used during my time when I was applying was, I just kept telling myself, as long as I keep trying, as long as I keep, reaching out to people, reading about what's happening in the industry, networking, building connections, I knew that some sort of role would come out for me. And I say this as someone who graduated last year during the pandemic, wanted to stay in media and entertainment. And on top of that, my focus was always music and events, which was probably one of the most challenging parts of the industry to get into. But as people have heard, one thing led to another, and I was able to get right into that space at Bulldog on the live streaming side. So really can't emphasize how important that was. And, I hope if this can kind of help anyone in this time, I hope it's useful. And, finally, here's my email. I'm always happy to chat with people. I did a couple of calls this week with people who attended last week's webinar. And, I've been on the other side. Even last year when I was applying for roles, I was that person that was emailing and, just reaching out to people, not knowing like, oh, am I being annoying? Like, should I be, like, how much should I follow up? But always follow up. That's something I always encourage people to do. But definitely understand, being on the other side. And part of why I, came up with this webinar was to pay it forward and really give back. And I think that's just something that if you want to lead a fulfilled life is key. And yeah, so there's my email, feel free to reach out. If you have any, specific questions, I'm happy to chat and, hopefully provide something useful. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Um, I'm just looking through the chat. Yeah, so okay, I love that people are, sharing who they are. LinkedIn, feel free to add me on LinkedIn also. I think if you put in that you saw me on this webinar, that's always helpful. So I know, how you came across my profile. So yeah, we're totally open to taking questions now. If you want to write in the chat something specific that you want me to answer. And also, or if you want to come on the mic and, just introduce yourself and ask any question in person, also happy for that. Okay, so yeah, I will share. All right, I'm going to put my email in the chat. So if anyone does want to reach out, it's there. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, like I said, feel free to type it in the chat or, just come directly on the mic. I'm also going to reshare the links that I shared earlier in the presentation. So this is for next week's webinar on interviewing. So similar format to this, I'm going to go into my background, techniques that have worked for me, how I tend to prepare, and also, best practices for interviewing, especially, in a pandemic, interviewing online. And, finally, definitely sign up for the Troy Carter Q&A. He's, truly a pioneer in the industry. As I mentioned, Spotify executive, managed Lady Gaga. So definitely someone that you want to hear from. And finally, here's the part 1 recording from last week on networking. Which, as I've mentioned, I think is still the most important thing And I've put some sort of unconventional tips in that webinar of what's worked for me, especially again, tailored to media, entertainment, and technology. So Travania asks, if a recent college graduate doesn't have much media experience but is interested in the field, how do you suggest ways to stand out? Yeah, that's a great question. One second. So I think the first thing is what I would start with is thinking about the experience that you do have, and it doesn't have to be a formal job or internship. It can be a side project that you did, a friend that you've helped them develop their music or help them market their music, for example. So start to think of how you can sort of translate that experience to being relevant for the role. I think that's one way. Also, if you've done anything at your college, if you're involved in any clubs, if you've taken any relevant classes, for example, you can always mention those. And, really what I would do is also just, try to find different projects. Oftentimes, especially in different Facebook groups I'm in, people will mention, hey, this big project came along and I'm looking for an intern to help with something. And, that's a great way to just get that first opportunity that'll then, provide you with that relevant experience that you need. So I think oftentimes it's not even about applying to these formal postings, it's about finding these sort of projects on the side. And I've also been proactive and reached out to people and explained, this is my background. I'm able to help with, these 5 things. If you need anyone to help in this, I'm available for that. So, one thing that I was doing in the summer when I was looking for jobs was I was reading a lot of news articles, and I would see, oh, this person started a new company or this person started a new division. So I'd reach out to people there and say, I'm sure since you're starting a new business, you probably need help with a lot of things. And this is what experience I have that's relevant. And that doesn't even have to be industry specific. It can just be general skills that you have. Because a lot of times in media, things are very project driven. There's no formal recruiting cycles because so much of it is just what is the need at this time. So being proactive and reaching out and just saying, hey, I'm available. This is what I have. And going back to the principles, always make it as easy as possible for the person who's reading it to see why you'd be a fit. But and yeah, the first thing I mentioned, think in kind of unique ways of what experience you do have, how that can translate over. I think, oftentimes we kind of shortchange ourselves. Like we think, oh, if I haven't worked specifically at a TV company, so I don't have the relevant skills. But when you think about it, they may just be looking for marketing experience, and you have that experience for a totally unrelated business, but it's still transferable at the end of the day. So those are some of the things that I would recommend. Do you think adding your social media handles and resumes helps or hurts the applicant? I've seen several internship applications ask for it, but I don't have a large following. Um, I think if it's a social media position, it can't hurt. Well, firstly, what type of content do you have on your channels, I think is important. Everyone I think should be aware that if you have content you don't want recruiters to see, obviously put everything on private. If a company is asking for your handles, you can always put them, and if your channel is private, then it's private. They won't be able to see it anyways. I don't really put my handle on my applications because I'm not really targeting, social media influencer type roles. But if a position's asking for it, I would put it. But don't feel like, oh, now I have to start creating all this content for my channel and try to like get 1,000 followers. If you're not trying to specifically target, social media influencer agencies or places like that, I wouldn't worry about it too much. And again, if your profiles are private, then adding the links to your resume and cover letter is not going to really do much anyways. So that's some general thoughts on that. But on the flip side, if you are applying to roles that are specifically tailored to people that can grow social media channels, I would start focusing on building your own personal brand and your own channels, because the people hiring are definitely going to be looking for that. All right, any other questions? Or I'd also love to hear if you found anything particularly useful Please put that in the chat just so I know, what resonates the most with people. How can I continue tailoring the types of events that I do? One thing that I learned from last week's networking webinar was, the personal examples that I showed, I think were useful. That's some feedback that I got from students. So based on that, I wanted to focus this session on, just putting all the different types of resumes and cover letters I've sent and kind of talking through different ways to do that. So yeah, if you found anything particularly useful, also happy to hear about that in the chat. And again, open and welcome for more questions or comments. Yeah, there are a lot of, so Haley mentions that there are some websites you can use where they can read your resume and share how you can improve. Yeah, definitely those are out there. At Columbia, we used a site called VMock, and it gave some useful tips that I also put in. So that's another tool that you can use. Um, yeah, yeah, totally understand. Tour Hong says that, I have some doubts on whether or not I should keep my resume traditional or creative. I think, have one of each, have a traditional example and then also have a creative one. And based on the person who's reading your application, based on the type of role, I think you can figure out which one to use. That's something that I would recommend for that. Yeah, definitely. I think building relationships is, of course, key because, again, you want to make sure that your materials get read. And a lot of that is being proactive on the front end and, reaching out to people even before there's a job or internship available and just, expressing your interest and learning more about the roles. A perfect example is someone from last week's webinar reached out to me and, she was just asking general, advice on working in music, what my experience was like. And she was applying to an internship at Insomniac. And, just based off of that connection, I said, hey, well, I worked at Insomniac. I'm happy to review your materials and I can at least send it along to people I know. And, hopefully they'll at least read it. So that's a great example of someone being proactive, reaching out and, just using a different way to get those materials actually read. Yeah, exactly. Erica mentions that everything is based on context and to research the company or position. Exactly. I think, one of the great things about applying for media roles is that, everyone should have a connection to the company they're applying to. If it's Disney, talk about your personal connection with the company. What sort of content are you watching? What are your thoughts on The Mandalorian, for example? And I like to lead with that in the cover letter, like start with the story, start with that personal anecdote or connection that'll help you kind of stand out. And that's something that I think is especially helpful for people who may not have a ton of experience right off the bat. As someone that's now on the hiring side, I think the first thing is people are always going to want to know, does this person have a passion for the specific type of content and media we're creating? So highlighting that in your cover letter, I think is great. Anaya asks, can wordy bullet points only 2 to 3 negatively affect your resume? So if I'm reading that correctly, I think you're saying you have a job or internship and you've listed, maybe 2 bullet points and they're probably, 2 to 3 lines long. It really depends on how it reads, but I think, again, going back to making the job of the reader as easy as possible, I always would make sure that my bullets were not past 2 lines. So, meaning that each individual bullet didn't go past 2 lines on the resume. Because I think generally that should be enough for getting across the impact of that work. And if it's going to 3, it's probably, the messaging is probably going to get convoluted. Now, of course, with everything, there's exceptions, do what works for you. But generally, I would say probably I would focus on keeping it to 2 lines. I think also sometimes we kind of wonder, how do I explain what I actually did? And that may be why, or explain the company, and that might be why the bullet is going to 3 lines. And what I would recommend is, as I pointed out in a couple of examples, is You want to just explain the company and your general work right under the actual line where it has your company listed. So that way your bullets are specifically focusing on the impacts of your work and the projects that you worked on. Haley says, what about name dropping in your cover letter? Yeah, I always do that. I think if you've talked to anyone at the company, even the example I gave, if you may not have a personal connection at the company, but if you heard someone speak at a webinar or you saw them quoted in an article, you can even mention that. It's again showing you've done your homework, you've done your research, you're personally very interested in this place and the type of work that they do. And yeah, oftentimes if you name drops, the person reading it may say, oh, I know this person, and that again is just building that personal connection. So yeah, always encourage people to name drop. And it doesn't even have to be someone you've actually talked to. So yeah, any final questions I'm happy to take. The last part of this webinar series will be on Saturday. So definitely encourage people to sign up for that. And, like I said, feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to chat one-on-one, if you have any specific questions, anything like that. And finally, definitely, if you're here, I think Creative University is an opportunity everyone should take advantage of. So highly, highly recommend going to the website, applying, letting us know who you are, ways that you'd like to get involved. We're open to new ideas, and there are multiple internship opportunities that have come up, and also opportunities to help grow creative universities. So definitely, take advantage of all of that. All right, great. So with that, I'm going to end today's session. Again, thank you so much for coming, and I hope to see you all at next Saturday's event and also the Troy Carter Q&A. All right, thanks everyone.